back because we are legally everywhere with child. We are legally everywhere looking into everything. Okay, y'all. So today I have a learn with me. We're gonna do what is called in project management a sprint. And when I say we're gonna sprint, baby, we finna pew, pew, we finna Sonic the Hedgehog this thing, right? We're gonna do a 10-week sprint. Essentially, I have exams coming up, and what I need to do is just make sure I reinforce everything that I have been learning, everything that I've been reading. And so how we're going to do that is I have set up material that I want to review and have successfully looked through. Every week, I have certain goals, little targets, little things I want to hit, make sure I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, right? So because I'm doing it in 10 weeks, I think I might as well share it with my people, make sure y'all can kind of like tap in, see what's going on. So if y'all seen the cover, y'all know we talking about contract law in this particular live. But y'all also, if you've been on my channel, you know we've been doing criminal law review as well. So y'all probably haven't seen me do contract law material since probably, I don't know, like December. Child, we're going to go back to the foundations, knock all that out. And if y'all are interested, then we can go back and relook at how we viewed that one and see if we still hold the same views. But right now, like I said, this is starting from fresh, right? So what I did was I told y'all I can't share my immediate material from my program, but what I can do is share with y'all my notes, okay? So essentially what we're going to go ahead and do today is I'm going to pull this back. Hopefully y'all can see this. We're going to knock out these key areas, okay? So basically week 1 is going to focus on what is contract law, why contract law exists, functions and purposes of contract law, freedom of contract, sources of English contract law, common law and legislation, the doctrines of precedent, the role of judges in developing contract law, the English court structure as it relates to contract disputes, civil versus criminal law, like distinctions relevant to contract, private law versus public law, the basic life cycle of a contract, which is another reason why I did choose to do the project management structure when we talk about life cycles. Hello. So we'll do the basic life cycle of a contract, introduction to contract formation, and the essential like legal terminology that's going to pretty much be introduced during this period, just so I'm not just throwing a whole bunch of random things out there, okay? And then like any key like introductory like cases or authorities included in some of the documents that I uploaded, okay? So that's what I'm going to be sharing with y'all as we are studying and learning out loud, child. So I'm doing it with y'all. Y'all are doing that with me. I am literally going to move through my little sketchbook of what we're going to be covering this week. Today is Tuesday, but listen, we're going to move through this. So if you're familiar with me, you know that I like to do visual maps. I like to do sketchbooks of what I need to learn, why I need to learn it, because I'm a very visual person. I like to see very visual things. It helps me be able to memorize if and when I need to memorize a piece of information. Child, I'm trying to memorize 1 page, okay? I was taught in 8th grade by one of my favorite instructors. Her name was Miss Secord. And she always told us to put all of our notes on 1 page so that we could memorize it if we needed to. So that's exactly what I do. I took something I learned from 8th grade and I'm still applying it in this good old day and age, okay? It really has worked for me. Everyone has their own learning style, but this is what works for me. I told y'all my people, so I share everything that I pretty much do because I don't see a reason why I need to gatekeep it. I pay for it and I do with it what I want. But I'm going to follow the rules. They said I'm not allowed to give y'all my notes, so y'all don't get to see my actual like class structure, like PowerPoints or any of the lecture material. But that don't mean I can't make some lecture material and share it with y'all because that's pretty much how I study anyway, okay? So what I did is I took the content connected to all the things I just gave y'all that I want to put in my 10 weeks worth of straights or sprints rather. And I put it into what's called Notebook LM, which just now got converted over to Gemini. And it just finished rendering, which is why we hopped on this live a couple of minutes later. It took a little bit of extra time. For some reason, they gave me 2 separate podcasts. We might listen to both. But right now, I had only planned for us to just do one of them. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to identify all of those key areas that they discuss in this podcast, okay? I have not heard it because I just told y'all it just rendered. So we are in the same exact place. Before I press play, if y'all have any questions, I'm going to go ahead and look in the chat and see if there's anything that, I need to address. So I see someone asked what is happening. We're covering contract law. I'm doing a 10-week sprint. As outlined on this sketchbook, there are some key areas that we are going to be covering, right? The focus areas that I just outlined. You'll see that right there. We talk about the life cycle of a contract, which is right here. We'll be talking about why it matters, the big picture, the source of law, all these key elements that I've kind of just verbalized. This is a visual outline of what that's going to look like. I set all this information, I extracted it from my notes, the lecture, the PowerPoint, transcripts I could download, and I'm putting it into a podcast format, okay? So, like I said, I have not heard it either. We're going to be doing this together. We're going to ask questions, and yes, technically it's not my homework because I guess you can say I'm being extra. I did see Charlie asked, this technically is not my homework. This is for studying for my exams that are coming up. But this is how I study. My brain requires me to be more interactive, more engaged. So I make my studying process more immersive, if that makes sense. I find any and every way to connect it to my everyday life so it makes more sense. Because if I'm just looking at material, just reading, it kind of becomes blah. But if I make it more integrative, more interactive, if I find ways to apply it to the everyday situation, or just make it more comfortable to be in my everyday life situation, it's far more easier for me to truly understand the material and truly be able to apply, which is what I believe the intention is behind the way we're learning it. So where am I from? I am from the United States, specifically Michigan. And for anybody out there, go blue. It says my accent slays. Thank you. Thank you all so much for your compliments. Thank you so much for the engagement in the chat. Thank you all. What we're going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and pull this up. But I do encourage you to like, comment, subscribe. But more so, stay engaged in the chat. Chat with me because once again, we studying together. I told y'all I'm going to share with y'all what I learned. Right now, we're working on contract law. I usually move between contract law and criminal law. I've been primarily focusing in the last month on criminal law. But right now, I need to kind of get back into my contract law material because we got a deadline, baby. We got a deadline. This is a 10-week straight. I keep calling it straight because I feel like I'm filmed, but it's a 10-week sprint. I'm going to go ahead and pull up my material now so that we can go ahead and listen. Any other questions? Let me see. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and listen in. I'm so excited to share this with you guys. I see you all in the comment section. Let me see if it can get this to bend a little bit so y'all can see that screen a little bit better. Okay, so we're going to try to identify, once again, the main areas that I outlined, right? Let me see. So that's going to be these main focus areas, if you can see that. Matter of fact, I see a few more people just popped on, so I'll give you a visual so you can see the screen. Okay? All right, so now that you've had those few moments to see the screen, we are going to go ahead and put the podcast on. So the podcast, the AI podcast, I have not listened to it. Right now, it says it's coming out at 25 minutes and 20 seconds. I'm so excited to hear what they're going to say, and we can chat in the comments. I'm so excited, y'all. So let's go ahead and jump in.
Usually when we think about the laws that hold society together, we picture, something heavy. We picture chains, police officers, gavels coming down, maybe judges in wigs.
Right, something imposed on us from the outside just to keep the chaos at bay.
Exactly. But then you look a little closer and you realize there's this entirely different legal universe operating underneath it all. One that isn't made of chains, but, well, rather an invisible web.
And the most fascinating part is that you are literally spinning this web yourself every single day.
Yeah, you don't need a judge or a gavel to build it. You just need to buy a cup of coffee or download an app or maybe promise to pay your neighbor to mow your lawn.
Which is crazy when you really think about it.
It is. So, welcome to your custom tailored deep dive. Today we are exploring this invisible web, which is contract law, and we have a fantastic stack of sources guiding us today.
We really do. We've got some Visual University sketchbooks, a masterclass lecture transcript by a true contract law veteran, Professor Roger Helson, and this is the best part, the absolute latest 2026 pre-exam legal updates.
Right, so our mission today isn't to just
Oops, let's see what I just did here.
throw dry textbook definitions at you. We want to genuinely understand the engineering behind this web, like why it exists, how the mechanics of it actually function in the real world.
And then we're going to zoom in on some of the quirkiest, most surprising rules of what the law calls unilateral contracts.
Yes, and we'll also see how rules that were invented for like Victorian era patent medicines are actively deciding massive corporate disputes today in 2026.
It's quite a journey.
I mean, it's just wild to think about that continuum, right? But before we get to the weird exceptions and Victorian smoke balls, we really need to establish the baseline. We need to look at why society gives private contracts this immense power over our lives.
That's a great place to start.
Because think about it, if I break a promise to a friend, they might get mad at me. But if I break a contract, the actual machinery of the state gets involved to enforce it. Why do we give this invisible web so much teeth?
Well, it really comes down to this one fundamental human need, which is predictability. Contract law basically exists to provide certainty, fairness, and trust in everyday life, and crucially, in business.
Right, protecting our expectations.
Exactly. When you agree to exchange something of value, you need to know the other person is actually going to follow through, or that there will be a concrete remedy if they don't. That predictability is the entire engine of commerce.
Oh, which makes sense because nobody wants to do business if they're just crossing their fingers and hoping for the best.
Precisely. It's actually the reason why common law jurisdictions, like the UK, consistently rank so highly in things like the World Bank's doing business rankings.
Wait, I actually want to pause on that for a second because that's a really interesting connection.
What?
How exactly does the legal system create that specific economic predictability?
It does it through the Doctrine of Precedent, which is the absolute backbone of the common law system. See, in English contract law, rules come from two main sources. You have legislation, which are the statutes created by Parliament. But a massive portion of contract law actually comes from the common law.
Meaning the judges.
Right, rules created and refined by judges through their decisions in actual real-world cases over centuries. Because lower courts have to follow the rulings of higher courts. A business operating today can look at how a judge ruled on a commercial dispute back in, say, 1920.
Oh, wow. And reasonably predict how a judge will rule on a similar dispute in 2026.
Exactly. That historical consistency drastically lowers the financial risk of doing business. It creates this stable environment for free markets to function.
That makes perfect sense. It's all about stability. But this is a very different flavor of law than what we usually see on television, right?
Oh, completely.
Like if I steal someone's car, that's a crime. The police get involved. But if I sign a contract to buy that car and then just refuse to pay the bill, I haven't committed a crime, have I?
No, you haven't. You've crossed the boundary from public law into private law.
Okay, break that down for us.
Sure. So criminal law is public, right? It is the state prosecuting an individual to maintain public order. The burden of proof is beyond reasonable doubt, and the result is punishment. Like a fine or going to prison.
Right.
Contract law, on the other hand, is civil and private. It's a dispute strictly between individuals or organizations. The state isn't prosecuting anyone at all.
It's just providing the arena for you to resolve your dispute.
Exactly. And because nobody's liberty is at stake, the burden of proof is much lower. It's decided on a balance of probabilities, meaning it's just more likely than not that a breach occurred.
And I assume the result isn't punishment then.
No, not usually. It's the damages, which basically means financial compensation designed to put the injured party back in the position they would have been in if the promise had actually been kept.
Okay, so if contract law is this private arena, how do you actually step into it? Like physically, where do you go? Let's trace the ladder here.
Good question. So you have to look at the English court structure. If it's a minor thing, mostly criminal or lower civil, you'd be in the magistrates and crown courts.
Okay.
But for significant contract disputes, you start climbing.
Yeah.
You go to the high court. If someone appeals the decision there, it moves up to the Court of Appeal.
And then if it's really contentious, all the way up to the Supreme Court.
You got it. But of course, you only get to argue in any if you actually formed a valid contract to begin with.
Simplest example possible for that. I walk into a cafe and I order a flat white. According to the sources, I'm creating a contract, but I'm obviously not signing a 40-page document. How am I spinning this invisible web?
You are doing it by naturally satisfying the 4 essential ingredients that every legally binding contract requires to be born. Well, the moment you walk up to the counter and see the menu boards, the cafe is essentially inviting you to make a proposal. When you say, I'll have a flat white, you are making an offer. That's ingredient 1. When the barista says, that will be £3, and starts making the drink, they are providing the acceptance of your terms. That's ingredient 2.
Got it. And the third ingredient mentioned in the masterclass is intention, right? Specifically, the intention to create legal relations. I assume that means we both have to take this seriously. Like, if I tell my buddy I'll buy him a coffee tomorrow and I forget, he can't sue me because it was just a social promise.
Precisely. The context of a commercial transaction at a cafe heavily implies you both intend for the exchange to be legally binding. But the fourth ingredient is the real linchpin here, which is consideration.
Yeah, I like to think of consideration as the two-way street requirement. Basically, something of value has to be exchanged by both sides, right?
Exactly right.
So if I promise to just give you £1 million tomorrow as a pure gift, and I change my mind overnight, you can't sue me under contract law. You gave me nothing in return for my promise. It's a one-way street, so the law just won't enforce it.
That is the absolute perfect way to visualize it. In the cafe, your consideration is the £3. The cafe's consideration is the coffee. Value flows in both directions.
It's elegant, really.
It is. And what's truly remarkable is that while the stakes, the paperwork, the sheer complexity differ wildly between buying a coffee and, say, executing a multi-million-dollar corporate merger, the foundational DNA is identical.
Offer, acceptance, intention, and consideration.
Yes. If even one of those is missing, the web collapses.
Okay, so that establishes our baseline. We have our two-way street. But here is where the sources take us straight into the deep end. There are actually 2 different mechanics for how that two-way street can operate.
Right, which perfectly sets up the main focus of our deep dive. We have to divide the contract universe into 2 hemispheres. You have bilateral contracts and you have unilateral contracts.
Let's start with bilateral, since that's the one we see most often.
Yeah, a bilateral contract is what we encounter probably 99% of the time. It is simply a promise exchanged for a promise.
Like, I promise to deliver my car to you tomorrow if you promise to pay me £10,000 tomorrow.
Exactly. The very moment those mutual promises are exchanged, even before anyone has handed over a car or a check, both parties are instantly legally bound to perform.
Okay, but a unilateral contract completely changes that dynamic because it isn't a promise for a promise, it's a promise for an act.
Right, which means suddenly only one person is actually on the hook. In a unilateral contract, only one party makes a promise, and their obligation is totally contingent on the other party actually performing a specific act.
So the classic textbook example here is a lost dog poster, right? Like, I will pay £100 to anyone who finds my lost dog.
Yes, exactly.
Let me make sure I'm crystal clear on how the web works here. If I tape that lost dog poster to a lamppost, nobody who stops to read it is legally obligated to go look for my dog. They haven't promised me anything.
Not a thing.
I can't sue them for just going home and watching TV. But the second someone actually walks up to my front door and hands me the leash, I am legally trapped. I have to pay them the £100.
That is the exact mechanism. In a unilateral contract, the physical performance of the act is the acceptance and the consideration, all rolled into one singular event.
That makes so much sense.
You don't call the owner and say, I accept your offer, I will now begin looking. You just do the act. And the offer is only legally bound to pay you when the act is fully completed.
Wow, okay. This brings us to the benchmark case from our sources. The legendary 1892 case, Carlyle v. Carbolic Smoke Ball Company. I love this one. This is just a fantastic story of Victorian era hubris.
Oh, it really is. The 1890s were basically the Wild West of patent medicines. So the Carbolic Smoke Ball Company put out this massive advertisement in the Pall Mall Gazette. They claimed that if you bought their smoke ball, which, by the way, was this little rubber device that literally puffed carbolic acid powder up your nose.
Sounds incredibly pleasant.
Right. Well, they said if you used it 3 times daily for 2 weeks, you absolutely would not catch the flu.
Bold claim.
Very. And to back up their claim, they promised a 1,000-pound reward to anyone who contracted influenza after using it as directed.
Which, just for context, in 1892, 1,000 pounds was an astronomical amount of money. It was enough to buy a very sizable house.
It was a fortune. And to prove their intention to create legal relations, they printed right there in the advertisement that they had deposited 1,000 pounds in the Alliance Bank on Regent Street to show their sincerity.
So they were basically daring people.
Exactly. Well, a woman named Mrs. Carlyle saw the ad, bought the smoke ball, diligently puffed the acid up her nose 3 times a day for weeks, and caught the flu anyway.
That's shocking.
I know. So when she recovered, she sued them for the 1,000-pound reward.
And the company fought back, of course, arguing that it's just impossible to make a binding contract with the entire world. They basically said she never called them to notify them she was accepting the offer.
Right. But the court completely dismantled the company's defense. The judges established that you absolutely can make a unilateral offer to the entire world.
Wow.
And crucially, they said Mrs. Carlyle did not need to notify the company to accept. By laying down the terms of a reward for an act, the company waived the need for communication of acceptance.
So sniffing the smoke ball and catching the flu was the acceptance.
Exactly. The company had to pay up.
That is such a great victory for the consumer, but, it exposes a massive, messy logistical problem. In a unilateral contract, the person responding only accepts the deal by fully completing the act. So what happens if the person who made the offer changes their mind halfway through? How do you revoke an offer made to the whole world?
Revocation is a fascinating puzzle here. Let's look at how it works normally first. In a standard bilateral contract, if you want to cancel your offer to sell me your car, you just have to communicate that revocation to me before I accept.
Simple enough.
Interestingly, our sources mention a quirk from a case called Dickinson v. Dodds from 1876. That actual communication doesn't even have to come from you directly.
Oh, right, the third-party loophole. The university sketchbook uses a really good yacht race hypothetical for this. An organizer offers a prize for a race but then cancels it. A sailor named Aphrodite doesn't hear the cancellation from the organizer. She hears it on her radio from other boats.
Right.
And because she heard it from a reliable third party before she formally accepted, the offer is legally revoked.
Exactly. That third-party communication fundamentally shifts the burden. As long as the offeree knows the deal is off before they accept, the revocation is totally valid. But as you hinted at, unilateral contracts present a unique nightmare here.
Because if I put a reward ad for my dog in a national newspaper, I can't personally call every single human being who read it to tell them, hey, I found the dog. It's physically impossible.
Yeah, and the law recognizes that impossibility. To solve it, courts developed what we call the notoriety rule. It derives from an 1875 American case, Shuey v. U.S., which English courts actually respect and follow.
Okay, how does that work?
The rule states that to revoke a unilateral offer made to the general public, you must give the revocation the exact same notoriety, meaning the same level of publicity and reach that you gave the original offer.
Let me make sure I've got this. So if I publish the original reward offer in a massive full-page spread in a national newspaper, I can't just quietly publish the revocation in like a tiny, obscure local newsletter and say, well, I published it, my hands are clean.
Exactly. It would fail the test. It wouldn't achieve the same notoriety, so the revocation would be completely invalid. Anyone who completed the act could still legally claim the reward.
Okay, but I have to push back on the practicality of this, though. Let's go back to our lamppost example. If I stick a lost dog flyer on one specific really busy lamppost in my neighborhood, do I legally have to go back out in the rain to that exact same lamppost and tape up a nevermind sign to achieve the exact same notoriety? What if the lamppost was, I don't know, knocked over?
Well, you have to remember, the law is pragmatic. It's not pedantic. The courts aren't looking for mathematical exactness. They're evaluating the method and the audience.
Okay.
If you put up posters around a neighborhood, taking them down or putting up a few dog found posters in the same general vicinity would very likely satisfy the notoriety requirement. The overarching goal is simply to ensure you took reasonable equivalent steps to inform the same pool of people.
Okay, that makes sense. So that covers revoking an offer to the general public. But what if you try to revoke the offer directly to someone who is already halfway through doing the act? This is where Professor Helson's masterclass gets into the concept of the 39th lap, right?
Yes.
Okay, so before we get into the 39th lap, did you guys have any questions about, we're about a little bit more than halfway through this particular podcast. Any questions that you guys want to put in the chat? I really wanted to make sure this information was accessible and fun and we could learn together. So if you have questions, feel free to ask me. Feel free to ask. Oh, also, just to make sure that it's somewhat a little bit more clear, we have actually covered what so basically week 1 was to focus in on all these key areas, right? So right now I have it, the one I can read. I'll flip it back to the one you can see. So what is contract law, right? Why contract law exists, functions and purpose, right? Freedom of contract, common law and like legislation. Pretty much the doctrine of precedence, role of judges in developing contract law, English court structure, right? We've been kind of touching on some of these pieces. This is not a full dive in because, as you know, we'll be diving in this throughout the week. But I wanted to make sure that we were really touching in on these pieces because these are pieces that I would want to be able to do pretty much a high level of recall. So what I want to make sure is that the lifespan, or as we call it, like the life cycle of the contract, we can see it, right? So we have heard a lot of this language being introduced, which is the offer. One party makes a clear offer. Now, right now, we've been actually, through the lens of this particular podcast, is talking a little bit more about the unilateral. So that's more so what we've been hearing about. There's unilateral and bilateral. So we have the offer. We have acceptance. So one party makes a clear offer. The next part would be acceptance. Another party accepts that offer. The consideration, something of value is exchanged, right? Something of value. It doesn't always have to be currency, but it does have to be something of value. And so then we move to intention. Party intends to be what? Legally bound. So then a contract after that point is formed. And then there's legal obligations at that point. Then from there we have the performance, which means you are to do whatever you guys contracted to do. Or is a breach and it didn't happen, if that makes a little bit more sense, right? So rights and remedies follow at that point. So that kind of gives you just a down and dirty, right? I always say as long as we're in the ballpark, but I have to be super specific when I take the exam. You know, if you're not taking exam, maybe you don't have to be as specific. But that's the down and dirty of how that life cycle looks. So that's the image. If you took a screenshot, when I put it up, I can always put the camera closer. That's what that life cycle looks like. And then we kind of have from the UK perspective. That's where I'm studying, taking my exam. This is the England and Wales. I might put the comparator up because you guys know I love to do comparative law. So I might put the comparator up. Might do this again and add that little image. This will show the civil versus the criminal with regards to contracts, right? Then we have some of the terminology, which I kind of just gave you. But offer would be a clear proposal to enter a contract. Acceptance would be an agreement to the terms, right? Consideration is the value given in exchange. So intention is intention to create legal like relations. Capacity is the legal ability to contract. Like, are they legally able to make a contract with you, right? I would hope your people are not trying to do contracts for like a 3-year-old, right? You know, so is a person in an ability to make a contract, right? Someone who is 3 years old Although maybe you have discussed some things, like you wouldn't contract with the 3-year-old per se to do certain things. Maybe you contracted with their guardian, legal guardian, or maybe like a parent, right? But you wouldn't contract with like a 3-year-old to do something, right? So that like their legal capacity, because they don't legally have an ability to consent over themselves at 3 years old. We know that the age range for consent, depends on jurisdiction, so I won't jump too much into that. But thinking of it from like that perspective, and then we talk legality. The contract's purpose must be what legal, because you're supposed to legally be contracting people to do illegal things, right? So hopefully that makes sense. I'm gonna go look in the chat, see some engagement. I see that Charlie, you had to leave. It was so nice seeing you. I look forward to you popping back in the chats at some other point in time, and maybe some of our other lives. Thank you so much for being here today and visiting us. We have enjoyed you in the chat. I see we have some more people that just hopped onto the chat. Hello, welcome. Feel free to drop some questions in the chat. I'm just sharing, what I've been learning. We are listening to an AI's interpretation of my class notes. I put in some specific questions, a specific focus, which is the material that's placed on my week 1 of the 10-week sprint that we are doing through this material, because exams will be coming up and I need to be able to do a high level of recall and application with this material. So I'm super excited to be doing this and sharing it with you all. We're about halfway through and we are going to jump back into this. I just wanted to make sure I explain some of these pieces that are already on the image. Also, where is it? You saw that this was one of the key cases that was highlighted, which should be Williams versus, here we go, Rafi Brothers, and here you go. Can you see? Sometimes I can't fully see the angle the way y'all see it. But pretty much that breakdown, we heard about that case, right? I did some comparators because for me, it's difficult to be thinking about what cases are like other ones. So I was like, you know what, let me just, in my studying process, let me go ahead and set this up in ways that make sense for me, right? And this is what works for my little old brain here. But we did hear this particular case, and this is more so under the conversation of consideration, okay? So for me, I wanted to be able to share that. The holding for this particular case was the promise of additional payment was enforced. The practical benefit received by Rafi constituted valid consideration. So for those who were listening before, they were kind of talking about it, chopping it up. If you need me to come back to that, because some people left and came back, no problems. We can do that again, because once again, this is a whole study session. So whatever works. I can break this whole piece down if needed. But I also want to make sure we just kind of hear what the podcast said. Because like I said, I run these, I put the information in, and then I come in and study with y'all. These are special for you guys, special for us, this whole little setup we got going on. I don't listen to it before it comes on. So I'm always interested in what it's saying and how it's interpreting the information. As I navigate the material with you. Obviously, I'm familiar with my actual study materials that I got from my classes, things I've been writing myself, sketchbooks, like my notes. I embed those in and see what comes out. So let us go ahead and continue.
This is perhaps the most critical area of unilateral contracts because it reveals exactly how judges use case law to literally physically shape contract doctrine. They have to prevent fundamental unfairness while still protecting commercial logic.
And Professor Halson gives this very instinctive, relatable example. Imagine you offer your kids some money to run 40 laps around the house. They are sweating, they are tired, and just as they are finishing lap 39, you lean out the window and shout, "I revoke the offer."
It provokes an immediate sense of injustice, doesn't it?
It's completely unfair. Because the rule says they can't accept the contract until they fully finish the act, but you deliberately stop them from finishing it at the very last second.
And the courts absolutely recognize that unfairness. We see the legal solution in a really landmark 1952 case, Arrington v. Arrington.
What happened there?
A father told his son and daughter-in-law that if they paid off all the remaining mortgage installments on a house, the house would belong to them. It's a classic unilateral promise for an act. The young couple moved in and dutifully started paying the mortgage week by week. But later, the father passed away, and his widow, their stepmother, tried to revoke the offer and literally kick them out.
Because technically they hadn't finished the act yet. The mortgage wasn't fully paid, so the widow argued there was no accepted contract.
Right. Her logic was technically sound under the strict old rules. But the judge, the famous Lord Denning, ruled against her. He decided that once the couple had entered on performance, meaning once they paid that very first mortgage installment, the offer could no longer be revoked.
Wait, how did he do that legally?
To achieve this, the judge implied a subsidiary promise into the contract. It's like an invisible secondary promise running alongside the main one, which essentially says, I promise I will not revoke this offer once you have begun performance.
I have to admit, that feels like a massive overreach. Like, judges are basically looking at a contract, deciding somebody's being a jerk, and just magically inventing a brand new invisible promise to fix it. Where does that power stop?
It's a very valid concern. It really looks like judicial magic. But judges don't just invent terms because a situation feels emotionally unfair. They do it strictly for a concept called business efficacy.
Business efficacy.
Yes. They look at the transaction and ask, does this deal functionally make sense without this implied term? In Arrington, it makes zero logical sense for a young couple to pay someone else's mortgage for years if the promise of the house could just be yanked away on any random Tuesday.
Right, nobody would agree to that.
Exactly. The transaction only functions. It only has business efficacy if we imply a promise not to revoke.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. It's about making the mechanics of the deal logical, not just fair. And there is a hard limit to this power, which the sources highlight by contrasting Arrington with another case from 1941, Luxor v. Cooper.
Yes, Luxor provides the crucial dividing line here. In this case, the owner of two cinemas offered an agent a £10,000 commission if the agent introduced a buyer who successfully purchased both properties.
And just to anchor that number, the masterclass transcript notes that £10,000 in 1941 was actually more than the annual salary of the Lord Chancellor, the highest-ranking judge in the UK.
It was an astronomical reward for relatively little physical work.
Right?
The agent successfully found a willing buyer and made the introductions.
Right.
But then, the cinema owner simply changed his mind and refused to sell the properties to anyone.
Which means no commission.
Right. The agent sued, arguing exactly what you'd expect. I started performance, I found the buyer, you can't revoke, imply a subsidiary promise for me, just like you did for the couple paying the mortgage.
But the court looked at it and said no. The agent gets nothing. Which on the surface feels just as unfair as the stepmother kicking the kids out. The agent did the work. How does the court justify that difference?
They justify it by looking at the commercial reality of the risk being taken. The judges looked at the size of the consideration versus the effort required. You were offered more than the Lord Chancellor makes in a year for the very small act of making a few phone calls and setting up a meeting. Because the potential reward was so disproportionately huge, the court determined the agent willingly took the known commercial risk that the deal might fall through.
Oh, so it was a calculated gamble. The agent knew the owner might back out, but the £10,000 made the gamble totally worth it.
Exactly. Therefore, the contract didn't need a subsidiary promise to give it business efficacy. The commercial logic of the transaction worked just fine without the judge's intervention, because anyone in business would gladly take a small risk for a giant payout. The courts use case law to carefully balance these scales based on the commercial reality of the specific deal.
So what does this all mean for us today? We've been dissecting Victorian flu remedies, 1940s cinema sales, and 1950s mortgages. How does this doctrine of precedent, this invisible web of implied terms and notoriety rules, actually hold up in a modern digital landscape?
Well, this is where the 2026 pre-exam legal updates you brought are so illuminating. They show us that the foundational DNA hasn't changed at all, even as the technology is completely transformed.
It's wild to me that the exact same foundational logic used to figure out if Mrs. Carlisle gets her money for a faulty smoke ball is currently being used to lock in massive modern corporate deals. Let's look at the 2025 case, DAZN v. Capang.
This is a perfect example. We are talking about negotiations for FIFA World Cup broadcasting rights. Extremely high stakes, multi-million-dollar contracts. The parties involved didn't sit in a mahogany boardroom drafting documents. They negotiated the terms through a series of casual WhatsApp messages.
Wow.
Yeah, and then finalized it with a summary email. When a rival offer came in, one party tried to back out, claiming a WhatsApp chat full of emojis and abbreviations isn't a real binding contract.
Which feels like a terrifying thought for anyone who uses WhatsApp for work. But when the dispute climbed the ladder to the Court of Appeal, which is just one step below the Supreme Court, so they take this incredibly seriously, the judges ruled it absolutely was a binding contract.
They did. Because the medium doesn't matter. The judges looked through the digital interface and found the visible web. They found clear language of an offer, an acceptance of terms, the intention to be bound, and consideration. The platform is irrelevant if the foundational DNA is present.
And we also see the courts continually refining exactly where they will intervene to protect vulnerable people, too. In another 2025 case, Waller Edwards v. One Savings Bank, the dispute went all the way up to the Supreme Court. They were looking at undue influence between married couples taking out loans.
This is a vital area of consumer protection. The Supreme Court ruled that banks have an incredibly low bar to be on high alert for coercion. If a joint loan involves anything more than a de minimis amount, which just means a minimal, trivial sum, the bank must take steps to ensure one spouse isn't being pressured into the contract by the other.
Right, and in this specific case, just £39,500 was considered more than de minimis. If the bank fails to check, the entire contract can be unwound. But at the exact same time, when the courts are dealing with massive corporations, they take a completely hands-off approach. They are very happy to let big businesses take whatever risks they want, which we see in the 2025 High Court case, EELTD v. Virgin Mobile.
That case is a masterclass in the freedom of contract within a B2B or business-to-business setting. The court upheld a strict exclusion clause that prevented the telecommunications company, EE, from recovering over £24 million in lost revenue after a breach.
24 million.
Yeah, and the reasoning is deeply pragmatic. These are highly sophisticated commercial entities with armies of lawyers. They deliberately use these clauses to allocate risk between themselves.
As the sources quote from the judgment, the primary purpose of these provisions is the division of insurable risk. Basically, the court is saying, if EE didn't want to swallow a 24 million pound loss, they should have bought insurance against it or negotiated a different contract.
Precisely. In the commercial arena, courts are not looking to enforce fairness. They are enforcing clarity. If you clearly agree to take the hit, well, you take the hit. The courts will not act as a savior for a sophisticated business that freely entered into a bad bargain.
So to pull all of these threads together, contract law is this constant, fascinating balancing act. On one hand, you have the ultimate freedom to spin the web however you want, from selling World Cup rights over WhatsApp to offering £100 for a lost dog to paying your kid to run laps.
Right.
But on the other hand, the court has a duty to maintain the certainty, the fairness, and the business efficacy of that web. They have to make sure the two-way street actually functions, whether they are implying subsidiary promises to protect a family or enforcing ruthless exclusion clauses against telecom giants.
It is a delicate, brilliant balance built case by case, century by century.
But it leaves you with a really provocative thought to mull over, especially as we look to the future. What happens to all of this careful human balancing when we fully integrate smart contracts on the blockchain?
Oh, that's a huge question.
Right. If a contract is entirely made of auto-executing computer code, do we even need the Arrington or Luxor precedents anymore? You literally can't lean out the window and shout, "I revoke!" on the 39th lap if the computer algorithm is mathematically locked in and just automatically transfers the cryptocurrency the second lap 40 is completed.
It's a fascinating frontier. If the code is unbending, it completely removes the need for judges to imply terms for business efficacy. But when the code replaces the judge, who decides what happens when the situation changes in a way the code didn't foresee?
Exactly. Does technology finally solve the human messiness of contract law? Or does an unbending, unrevocable code just create entirely new, unforeseen traps in the invisible web? Next time you buy a coffee or read a lost dog poster on a lamppost, just remember the immense legal machinery you are casually participating in. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive, and keep asking the big questions.
Okay, you have heard it. Interesting. I like the way they tied some of that. I wasn't expecting some of those elements to come up the way that they put it. I did ask to expand us out for, I play around with the little prompts and what have you to try to see what are the modern day applications and implications of certain things, right? So I was really interested to see how they kind of asked the question of the impact of like AI and how that might interact or interfere, but we'll just say interact, right? Let's keep it just really open with the way that we engage with contracts and thus, contract law. Very interesting. Something I might dibble and dabble in a little bit even once I get off the live, and I'll just kind of run through some of my material. But as we go back and we look at some of the key areas, let me pull my image up. And that's not the correct one. So as I'm looking at the sketchbook that I prepared for this week, right? An area of focus was what is a contract? Like what is, better yet, what is contract law, right? I feel that we have an idea based off of this podcast. We do have a good idea of what contract law is. I asked why contract law exists, right? Literally just even on that ending note, if you came towards the end, you can kind of have a little bit more of a concept of the importance and significance of contract law. It's, really to protect. And then the question might be protect who, right? But it depends on from what lens that you come from. If you're on the channel a lot, you know that we talk about the perspective, right? A lot of times we're looking at the same evidence, same information, but we're looking at it from different perspectives because it depends on the role that you're sitting in as to how you're looking at that information. But a lot of times it's the same exact information. So that's interesting. What is the function and the purpose? We've been able to outline some of those pieces. We've talked about precedents, right? And we didn't necessarily say, oh, this is the precedence for this one, right? But we did talk about how this foundational case that came in 1991, right? How this laid foundation for another case that they mentioned, right? They were kind of saying, hey, well, the real estate attorney who came in, he was like, well, I put all this work in, and I feel like because I put this work in, there was an offer that was put out there. I responded to that offer. I engaged. I did my due diligence. I did the action, right? So if we think about the lifespan, the person said there was an offer that's put out. They said, hey, that real estate person said, I accepted that. And they, let's say, intended to be legally bound to that situation. Like, yeah, like contractually, this offer was out there. This was a legitimate thing. And they said, hey, I engaged in the performance. The other person was like, well, you know what? I, was going to sell, but I don't feel like selling my property. The real estate person saying, from my perspective, I feel like you breached the contract because we have, there was an understanding. You put this out there. That was open, commercially for, anyone who was able to walk into the situation as a real estate person and benefit from getting this item sold, this property, right? And they kind of determined like, well, based off that particular industry, you took on a risk that you might not necessarily be able to sell, even if you said, hey, I made some calls, I put in, some effort, I spoke to some people. That like, that doesn't necessarily level up to saying that we have to absolutely support you being compensated and paid an X amount. And that X amount was noted to be rather large, right? A rather large portion. So it didn't necessarily give you the same feel that this particular case, which was the precedence for, but it was something kind of altogether different. They took a different approach. So it's just like kind of interesting to listen how they set things up, because once again, this particular case was cited as precedence as to why the realtor felt that they should be compensated. They did not rule in favor because of some additional pieces, right? But it's just like really interesting as we process and break it down. I'm not trying to like overcomplicate the way I'm explaining it either. So hopefully that makes sense. It's really interesting. Keeping in mind, y'all know me, so I will have I'll make some other ones because there's lots of case law that I have to do, but it's just one of the earlier ones that I have kind of been working through. As you can imagine, it takes me quite a bit of time to do all this because I actually do quite a bit of it by hand first, and then I let AI kind of come in, clean it up so it looks better, a little bit more comfortable, because I kind of have it on bigger pieces of paper and I'm writing it all out. And this kind of condenses it so all my boxes fit really nicely, because like I told you, I like to memorize the whole entire piece. So if you look at, let's say, that foundational one that we're speaking on, I kind of gave the 1 minute breakdown. So for that one, it's Williams was a subcontractor, right? The one that realtor was referencing. That initial case that they said was the precedent. That 1 minute breakdown was Williams was a subcontractor who was falling behind schedule and facing financial difficulties. Rafi promised to pay him extra if he completed the work to avoid delay and penalty clauses in its main contract, okay? Williams completed the work, but Rafi refused to pay the additional amount, right? The Court of Appeal held that since Rafi received a practical benefit, avoiding delay and penalty, the promise was supported by valid consideration, provided there was no economical duress or fraud. Okay? So that's just like the 1 minute quick breakdown. If I had to kind of break down the rule, a promise to pay more for the performance of an existing contractual duty may be supported by consideration if the promisor receives a practical benefit and the agreement is free from economic duress. Okay? So the facts, just straight put, if you like, I don't want all the little story pieces, you just like want to hear it straight, is William was hired as a subcontractor. He experienced financial difficulties. Rafi feared project delays and penalty clauses, right? Because once again, he had to get this contract and stuff done. So Rafi promised additional payment. William completed the work and Rafi refused to pay the extra amount of money. Because it's like, I basically already paid you to get this done. So, you know, he's like, hey, I'm going to give you some, break you off some bread if you could do this in the time line that you originally agreed to. It's like, hey, you falling behind. Like, you know, my money funny and I'm falling behind. They're like, listen, I'll break you off some bread if you can just get this done at the time frame you're supposed to get it done. Like, oh, okay. They go ahead and get it done. He's like, you know what? I'm about to give you the extra money. Because why I'm paying you extra to do what you're supposed to do, right? So it gets interesting. That's how the facts kind of sound, right? The holding was the promise of additional payment was enforceable because, like, you changed the terms. If we agreed, right, that conversation of an offer, and he was like, hey, you behind. And you're like, well, you know. You're like, hey, listen, if you can get this done, I'll pay you some more money. You're like, yeah, if you could pay me some more money, I can get this done. Because my money was funny. Okay, that's another offer. And you accepted it. Right? So that's that consideration part. You're like, hey, they kind of renegotiated a little situation right there. And now you're trying to back out. Now, that does sound like a breach because we have had different terms now, if that makes sense. You know, because I know, like, we thinking like, no, you already paid you. And I told you to get it done when I told you to get it done. And you said you was going to do it. But, you know, stuff happens. And you're like, listen, I got obligations on my end. I already done paid you this money. If I got to break off some extra money, if I have to send for, pay out extra, however you want to phrase that, right? Extra money to get it done, not a problem. But, you know, let's make sure this job gets done. And you like, nah, I changed my mind. Not paying you extra. When I already got you on contract to get it done by the 5th. And you talking about something, it might take you the 15th. And then I tell you I can give you some extra money. Now you can get it done on the 5th. Nah, you going to get it done on the 5th. But if we made an agreement to say, yeah, if you can get this deal done by the 5th, I'm going to give you some extra money. You're going to have to run them that bread. You're going to have to give them the money. In the words of Rihanna, you know, run them that money. That's what I heard. That's what I heard. So they said why it matters this case, modernize the law of consideration. Consideration is the big portion that we're kind of looking at in this, when we talk about the life cycle of the contract. By recognizing commercial realities, keeping in mind that commercial realities would come back up when we talked about that real estate example that came on the podcast, right? So sometimes commercial reality sometimes justifies enforcing promises to pay more even when an existing contractual duty already exists. But that's in a commercial situation, right? Pattern recognition, because I feel like that's super important. That's how my brain works. I'm like, well, what's the pattern? What's the pattern? Because if I need to apply this, I need to know what's the pattern. In the law structure, they usually use the word issue spotting. So that's the one I'm going to reference. They said, when you're thinking like Williams and Raffrey brothers, like when I see things like existing contract, when I see promise of additional payment, they say, I'll give you some extra money, right? Somebody like, oh, I'll pay you some extra money. Don't worry about it. Start thinking about this case. When it says the contractor's behind schedule, somebody like, oh, you know what? We had a contract, but might be a little delayed. I might need to be compensated a little bit something. Think Williams and Rafi. If it's commercial benefit to the promiser, the person who promised, the promiser, not the promisee, the promiser. And no evidence of economic desirableness. I think I wanted to put economic duress is the word I think I wanted. I'm gonna have to fix it. It's a typo. It should be duress. See? Gotta watch these things, you know. So as far as compare, distinguish, and related cases, I told y'all I'm always trying to figure like how am I gonna compare it and move it across. The Stilk versus Myrick of 1809. That was an older case. Pretty much the comparators for this case was historical ones. So you have Silk versus Myrick, which the sailors demanded extra pay to sail ship to a destination. It held no consideration. So the existing duty. Because keep in mind, this particular case is with regard to consideration. The ones that were before it, there was no consideration. It was all about the existing duty, right? So if it had been based off of this was like their focus in that case that was being referenced, or central case. So it would have been different because the consideration wouldn't have been a part of it. And if that was not the case, then they would have to be like, yeah, you won't have to eat that. You had a deadline, you had to get it done. Whereas in this one, it did more of a focus on the commercial realities, and that element was a big piece. Which is why they're like, no, you got to give them that money because you promised. Y'all kind of reconsider certain things. Reconsidered, right? So, very, very strict rule in most cases, right? And then to be distinguished with, right, because that was a comparator, to distinguish Folks versus Bear, which was 1884, promised to accept part payment, like a partial payment of debt, right? Held no consideration. Once again, the consideration was not being put into this one. So the practical benefit doctrine does not apply. So that's the one where they distinguished. It has to be distinguished. And then another related one would be Central London Property Trust versus High Tree, which is 1949. Promissory estoppel. Well, estoppel, I should say. Promissory estoppel. Equity may prevent a party from going back on a promise in certain situations. Okay. Let me see. So the IRAC application. So the issue is the promise of additional payment supported by valid consideration, right? That's the issue. The rule is a practical benefit may amount to consideration when there is no economic duress. Application. Identify the benefit received by the promiser. So like examples like avoiding delay, avoiding penalty, avoiding replacement cost, stuff like that. Compare those back to like Williams versus Raffi and Brothers, and distinguish Silk versus Myrick where appropriate. That would be like how I would handle if they gave me a specific case, kind of like the one we just saw with the realtor, right? We would kind of do that. And then the conclusion is if a genuine, like, practical benefit exists and agreements were freely made, consideration is likely satisfied. Because this particular case that's being referenced has a lot to do with consideration, a specific focus. I also already started trying to set up in my study practice like opposition. What might the opposition say? An opposition might say Williams merely performed an obligation he already owed, which is why I noticed I put that foundation down when I was explaining it. So there was no fresh consideration, right? Because we talked about them coming back in and saying, hey, listen, if you can get that done, like we discussed, I give you some extra money. That's not the problem, to get the job done, right? So some may say that's not a new setup. That's just, like, hey, you already had a job to do. It don't matter. Whereas in actuality, when you listen to it, that is another agreement, another understanding, right? And the responses, of course, recognize that Rafi obtained a practical commercial benefit beyond the original bargain. Commercial benefit. Well, because he say, I'm going to give you some extra money if you can get it done. We a dollar bill, y'all. And most people understand. So break me off some bread, run me my money then, The practical benefit constituted a fresh consideration because that was another agreement now that they have walked into. It's like the other one, hey, you didn't. We can make you whole and correct that by, if I give you this money, said your money's funny, and you're going to be behind schedule. That's not going to work for me. I got stuff going on. I need that done when it needs to be done. How about I give you a couple of extra X amount of dollars, right? Oh, that'll work. Now you can get it done. Okay, well, good, because I need it done. Run them the money. Well, basically, perform the action, right? Let me pull the one y'all can see. Perform the action, the performance, right? And if you don't do the performance, it's a breach. Do what you say you're going to do, or that's a problem. Run me the bread. Give me the money. Supply, demand, give it. And if they don't, that's a breach. And then you would handle that accordingly. So, once again, we walk through the idea of the offer, the accept, the consideration. That one case we just focused on more so with the Williams. That'd be more of the focus on the consideration. So we were able to actually even go back further into the history as to, what was precedence for that particular case. The intention, contract formed, and performance and breach. So we kind of walked through some of those ideas and concepts. I said I wasn't going to keep y'all long. My computer up here sounding off, ringing me an alarm. But once again, as you guys know, I just love to share with y'all. So excited to share. I said I was going to try to do a little midday, little lunch time frame setup and see how it works. I've been doing more of the criminal law content, so it's super important for me to just go ahead and knock out some of my contract law. If y'all been on my channel, y'all know on this page, some of my original content when I first started just getting my materials, and I was like, let me start looking through and start doing some comparators and some conversations that way. So I'm super excited to kind of come back now that I'm closer to the exam period and all of that. I had an opportunity to test earlier, and I said, let me hold off because I was looking at some of the other material. So I'm so excited that now I'm kind of venturing off into this. This is week 1 of the 10-week sprint that I'm doing to make sure that I am hooking and anchoring this information, that I really understand it, that I can share this information, that if you guys have questions, I implore you to ask me, because that was another reason why I wanted to do the Learn Out Loud. I want you guys to ask me questions so that it can stimulate my growth in my learning process, right? If I can't answer the question, then I need to keep reading. I need to keep studying. And I'm sure there are going to be questions that are posed and maybe go, oh, I hadn't thought about that. Let me think. Let me think. So don't feel like I don't want that question. I do want the question. I want the question because it helps me learn better and it makes things anchor better because I can be like, you know what? Somebody asked me that on my live and I looked into that, right? So we are studying together. Trust me, we are studying together. Don't be thrown off by some of my images. I just like very visual stuff. It works for me and I like to share it with y'all. Hey, I see Motley has come back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Part of the community. I see you are back. Once again, I'm always excited just to share with y'all what I'm working on, what I'm doing. Because y'all told me y'all like to see the process earlier on. I just was throwing stuff up. And y'all like, girl, we don't understand all that. We got to see the process so it makes sense. So hopefully, when I just break down how I process information, how I'm seeing it, it makes sense. I really just feel like this is just for all of us. You know, I feel in my heart that we all should just have this information because how many of us just sign contracts and agreements every single day? My phone did some weird update. And matter of fact, this notebook LM, well, that's what it was before. Now it's called Gemini. I went to put my information. I had to re-put it in, right? It gave me a new update. It said, hey, do you agree? A lot of times we don't even think about it. That's a whole contract. And you go read it, it almost feel like back in the day where you had the Rolodex, you like, phew. you got this whole thing worth of information that they want you to know. But guess what? It's more than wanting you know. They're holding you accountable for that information because you signed that information. You just click a button, toop. But they could be saying, we are collecting your information. We going to sell it off to somebody so they can break us off some bread. What? We didn't read it. Sometimes that's exactly what they say. Oh, we're going to be using your information. It goes to a third party. Sometimes you can say you don't want it to go. Sometimes you can't. You be like, why can't I access? They be like, you need to sign off and say we can use your information. So contract law is quite significant, right? It's quite significant. Like one of the examples in there, they said something about algorithms. If you're going in trying to potentially stop a unilateral contract, maybe you say, hey, you know, this is something just thrown out there to everybody. You don't have a specific person you're working with. Maybe it's just something generally like out there. And you put it out there and they're like, wait a minute, I want to stop this. But it's an AI algorithm and maybe it's not paying attention because it's coming out at 3, 6, 9, 12, you know. So you didn't put it out there at 10 o'clock and it didn't catch it. It's still sending stuff out at 12. And you're like, wait a minute. I've been told y'all to stop that. How does that interact with the way that laws are written in contract law, right? That would be a very interesting question. I don't know that answer. But I always say, y'all got some questions and stuff, you know. Feel free to ask your girl. I do my best. I'll always do my best to share with y'all as I'm processing, you know, the information as I marinate. Y'all know I love to say I'm marinating right now. I'm processing, I'm marinating, I'm sitting in this information. I'll be sitting in this particular content all week. So definitely feel free to drop stuff in the chat. Even once I'm past this week, I'll still be looking at my videos and responding to things. If it's not the live stream, the replay, it's going to just still sit on the channel. Y'all can still engage with me. So that once again, you're helping me in my process of studying. And hopefully I'm helpful to you as you get to kind of be, let's say maybe introduce or reintroduce for some people to the material. Maybe you're like, I was familiar with this material, but I hadn't processed it the way that you did. Or maybe you like, you know, what have you considered? That word consideration again. Well, that is the buzz term for the live, consideration. I just hope that you guys enjoy the content, right? I have always been someone who loves to share. Sharing is truly caring. I feel that each one should teach one. Listen, back in the day, I was one of them people who go on YouTube and there were so many OG hair, natural hair influencers, right? That I watched their channels and I got to learn how to do a couple of styles I wasn't familiar with, right? I got to do that for the low, or as we like to call it, for free, because I was just a part of their YouTube community. This is similar to that, but in a more educational sense. I get to share with you guys the things that I'm learning because I feel that my particular learning style is me being able to communicate that information to other people, lets me know where I'm at. It's a checkpoint for me to be able to see how well can I communicate my understanding of material. And I find it actually very cool and beautiful for me when sometimes I go watch my videos and I'm like, okay, that's an interesting way that I put that together. I kind of get to study the way that I process stuff with you guys, and I get to see it after the fact. So it's super cool. It helps me figure out how to fine tune things. Because sometimes I'll listen, I'm like, you know what, that was okay, but I need to refine that. And sometimes you guys might give me things. I'm like, okay, I need to dive into that. I'm like literally going to pole vote in something that you guys sent me as a comment or a question because I want to understand it. And I also want to be really a part of your community and be able to do my best to try to answer that, or at least get you some resources that I think could better address it. So always feel free to drop your comments, your views in the chat if you feel comfortable disclosing. I will not ever ask someone to disclose something they're not comfortable disclosing, but definitely if you are comfortable, engage in the chat. Not only does it help send this out to other people who might like this content, but it also kind of gives me that community sense that I wanted to have while I was studying this material, because that was it. I really wanted to make sure I had a sense of community. What bringing unity to the community out here. And speaking of community, I see some things going on in the chat. Let's see what's going on. Hello there. Hello there. Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate y'all giving me a look, telling me I'm kind of cool. I'm kind of nice. I appreciate y'all. Y'all be having your girl feeling good on these lives. Y'all are so kind. And then we have, I guess I have the contract law helps, protects us, especially those without an attorney. Child, and the way the economy is going, woo! Yeah. I'm never going to tell someone not to get an attorney if they want to get one, but I do understand that sometimes, it do cost a pretty penny. Sometimes it costs a pretty penny, and the economy got all this stuff going on. Y'all can see some of the stuff I got on the channel about some of the other economic things. Follow the Legally Everywhere framework videos that I had. We kind of talk about the economical pieces like of the puzzle, because y'all know I'm always looking at stuff like a puzzle piece. Woo-wee, the stuff that's going on with the US dollar. Just money across the board. It's been very interesting. So yes, I do understand for those who maybe don't have an attorney or maybe not able to get the legal representation that they may want, that it certainly can be uncomfortable. They usually do have legal help .gov or com or one of those. If you go Google it, they usually have those, at least in the United States. I believe almost all states have one. It's called legalhelp.org, I believe. So you can always go on there and see what information has been prepared by typically legal teams, people who have legal training. Usually they're lawyers and like law students who put those resources together. Sometimes it's like parenting time contracts. Sometimes it can be like a filing for divorce documents. Sometimes it can be educational types of contracts. Sometimes it's business kinds of contracts. You'd have to go in on those websites and look out that resource on your own. But I do know that they exist in multiple states. That is my understanding. Always use whatever resources are available to you, right? At all times. If it's a resource, let it be a resource. A resource is only a resource when you know how to use it. If you don't know how to use it and you don't know it's there, it's not really a good resource for you now, is it? So if you ever feel like you're in a situation where you need to get some information, look to see what free resources are out there, because what money is funny out here. But if you got to spend a pretty coin, maybe you got to spend a pretty coin. Okay, I ain't giving out no legal advice. I'm just saying, if you need to look into some things, don't ever be afraid to look into a couple of things, okay? With regards to what we were focused in on today, Let me see. I feel like we covered a good portion. We at least got our mouths nice and watered for the whole conversation of contract law during this 10-week sprint. Just the big picture that contract law governs promises that creates legal obligation. It provides what certainty, fairness, and trust in everyday life and in business. So kind of just navigating that and understanding you commit to things probably far more often than you think you commit to them. I was saying, like your phone, you committing to things. We make commitments, obligations a lot of times, even in our work situations, sometimes maybe even our family, personal situations. So I always say I like to reimagine in what ways and what I'm studying affects my everyday situation. That right there. Literally today I was looking, something updated on my phone. Now they want me to sign something. Said they sent something to my email that I'll never get. Now, I think that's a whole nother question because they always say they send the email. I didn't get it in my regular email, and I be checking the little spammy little file. So I'm trying to figure out what emails they send stuff to. Sometimes these companies will make you an email with them, and then everything go there, which is a whole nother conversation for another live. But it makes me happy when I'm able to kind of reimagine and to interact with material differently than maybe how I started that conversation. So today I'm interacting with it different than I initially started, and hopefully you're able to do the same. Hopefully it's helpful to you, and all that good jazz, right? So, child, this is Legally Everywhere. We are legally everywhere. We are legally everywhere, looking into everything. Let me go ahead and give y'all my little backdrop. Where is it? I was thinking I might go live, and then this image immediately came up. I might do another live today. I might do it. I really might. Okay. But on a more serious note, child, is Legally Everywhere, where we are legally everywhere, looking into everything. As I've told you before, I'm an international law student studying at the University of London. I am prepping for exams. I'm so excited. I'm very nervous, but predominantly excited. Today, we were focusing on contract law. We kind of did a little bit more of a focus on considerations based off of what the podcast chose to create for us. But I do take my notes. I put them into various resources. I create multiple types of styles of notes. Some are visuals. Some are like just kind of PowerPoint. Some are just like going through questions. Sometimes I'll do an AI reimagined of a lecture, right? Because I'm not allowed to give you my actual lectures, but that doesn't mean I can't use those as source material. Just got to be creative. So that's what we did today. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and I will catch you in the next video, because this is Legally Everywhere, where we looking into everything. This is Adrienne signing off. If you can and you feel comfortable, like, comment, subscribe, engage, stay a part of the community, because at this point you are no longer a stranger. You part of the community. I hope to see you in the next video, or maybe the next live. I might go live again today. Hey, we'll see. Until next time, bye.